Sittin Sportside podcast here on 1045theteam.com. I'm Eric Hanneman, and we could very well see some California love here in the NHL playoffs beginning this Wednesday, April 11th. We are finally at the Stanley Cup playoffs. 3 teams from California in this year's playoffs, and they all are from the Pacific Division, of course. Although the number 1 team from that Pacific Division is the Vegas Golden Knights, and only one of them will come out of their bracket. But we'll see if one of those teams can get into the Stanley Cup final. Once again, I'm Eric Hanneman here, 1045theteam.com and youtube.com/team1045, and the Sittin Sportside podcast tab on 1045theteam.com. Click on podcast, Sittin Sportside podcasts. It's a little late to see some of my MLB preview podcasts, but I you want to listen to some of those. I think that they're good, still a good listen at this point in the season. But you're not here for that, right? You clicked on this because you're looking for some opinions on the NHL playoffs beginning soon. And yes, they start this Wednesday. All 16 teams are set heading into this. And I've always loved the new format as it's come to fruition. I know there's been some critiques of it, but I've always seemed to like it because you're really pitting division rivals, teams that know each other well, and it creates good hockey, in my personal opinion. Now, let me also preface this by saying I'm not necessarily an expert on hockey. I follow it more than maybe the average person does, but I wouldn't call myself anything. I wouldn't be able to hold a candle to Barry Melrose. I wouldn't be able to stay in the same room with him in terms of knowledge, but I think I know enough to be able to make some predictions here. And I also should preface this by saying, if you don't know already, I am a Sharks fan, so if I pick them over the Ducks at least in the first round, then you'll know, okay, maybe he's a little bit biased, and you never really know where I'll go with that from there, because you have a young team in the Vegas Golden Knights, and a team that's, well, I guess really playing well all season, though, to be completely honest, and can be completely fair. So let's start off in the Western Conference. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to talk to you about the teams that I like going into the playoffs. I'll pick my entire bracket right here, going team by team, but I'll try to tell you what I like about each team, or what I don't like and why I don't think they'll go far, and I'll probably be wrong by a long shot on a few of these teams. But we'll start in the Western Conference because we were talking about the NHL. We introduced the podcast to California love, and we'll start with the Pacific area, the Pacific Division, with the LA Kings being the first wild card, the better record of the two between themselves and the Colorado Avalanche, who snuck in over the St. Louis Blues, beating them on the last day of the season. So the playoffs kind of started early for the Avalanche. We're not talking about the Avalanche, we're talking about the Kings. And the Kings are back in the playoffs, yet again. And we already know they've been a good team in the playoffs in years past. And if you look at the Pacific Division, they do finish 4th in the Pacific Division, 2 points behind the San Jose Sharks, same win total, and actually one more win both the Sharks and the Kings have over the Ducks, but they're all within 3 points of each other. The Ducks finished the season very well, an 8-1-1 record down the stretch in the last 10 games. But the Kings, out of those 3 teams, Ducks, Sharks, and Los Angeles, have the best goal differential out of those 3. 36 goal differential compared to 23 for the Sharks, plus 23 and plus 19. But they're going up against the best, obviously, in that division in terms of goal differential in the Vegas Golden Knights. And I'll start by saying the Kings, they're still a team that's going to be relying heavily on their goalie, and that is Jonathan Quick, right? I mean, he's been the guy that's carried them in the past in the playoffs, and they're going to rely on him throughout the playoffs no matter what. It's still his team, and he had a decent season, 2.4 goal against average, 92% save percentage, 92.1, and he is more than capable, in my personal opinion, to go on a run good enough to carry a team in the playoffs, especially against, I think because of the fact that Vegas Golden Knights are an expansion team and it seems unprecedented for them to go on a run, I feel like you kind of almost want to give the edge to the Kings because of their playoff experience and then the lack thereof of the Vegas Golden Knights. But it's not necessarily the case with Vegas, right? I mean, because if you look at Vegas, they have some players who have experience for sure in the playoffs. You have David Perron, and then obviously you have James Neal, who was a big-time player last season for the Nashville Predators in their Stanley Cup run. They lost to the Penguins, obviously, but they have guys who have experience in the playoffs, and even guys like Oscar Lindbergh. You know, he played in the playoffs, I believe, with the Rangers. So they have experience. And before I get into the Golden Knights a little bit here, I do think, though, that the Los Angeles Kings are definitely good enough. They still have the same core as they had before in terms of guys like Jeff Carter, Anze Kopitar, as to go along with Tanner Pearson, Dustin Brown, Tyler Toffoli. They have a good, and then defensively, Drew Doughty and Jake Muzzin. They have bring in Dion Phaneuf, who's a savvy veteran defensively. So I think that they're good enough to get the job done. Kopitar, and then obviously Jonathan Quick and his track record. That's why they're going to be a tough out. But I do think that Vegas is also just, it's just amazing what they've been able to do. And I don't think it's something that's kind of like, oh, wow, they got off to a great start and they were able to sustain it for most of the year, but we're here now in the playoffs, they're not going to be able to continue it. I think that it's the opposite of that. I think that here they are. They're ready. They're going to be ready for the playoffs. I mean, how much of an aberration are we getting from William Karlsson? I mean, this guy was kind of, he's surely young enough to people to expect maybe him to improve a little bit here, but at 25 years old, I don't think people were expecting, like the Columbus Blue Jackets, I'm not sure people were expecting them. They obviously didn't protect him to be as good as he did this year with 78 points, 43 goals scored, and they're just that good with James Neal as well. Man, I just really think that when you look at the Vegas Golden Knights, you talk about Jonathan Quick for the Kings, Marc-Andre Fleury, he has playoff experience. He has, 3 Stanley Cups? I know he didn't necessarily have as big of an impact as he did in his first one, obviously with Matt Murray being a big factor in the last couple of the Stanley Cup victories for the Penguins, but he has playoff experience. He didn't necessarily play. Murray was more of the goaltender in the Stanley Cup last year, but Fleury got them to the Stanley Cup last year. You forget that he played in those playoffs most of the way for Pittsburgh because Murray was having injury problems and even performance problems at times. And we've seen what Fleury's done this year. If you look at the top 6 goalies in the all of hockey this past season, you will see Marc-Andre Fleury, although he only played 46 games, that's not an only, but he had some injury problems. He had the 3rd best goals against average in all of the NHL among goalies, only behind Carter Hutton of the St. Louis Blues and Antti Raanta of the Arizona Coyotes, both of which aren't even in the playoffs. So that being said, he's right there with Pekka Rinne as a guy you can ride in the playoffs. Now I've spent about 8 minutes or 6-7 minutes here on this one matchup. I think it's going to be but I think it's because I kind of view this matchup between the Kings and the Vegas Golden Knights as maybe the premier matchup of the first round. I think there's going to be some pretty good ones over there in the Eastern Conference, and even in the Western Conference, you might get a good one with the Ducks, Sharks, and the Jets and the Wild. But I really like this. This is the one that intrigues me most over here. Obviously, besides the fact that I want to watch my Sharks. This matchup really intrigues me because I think you have a team that's really expected to do really well in the Los Angeles Kings, and another team that had the best regular season of any Pacific teams, and aren't necessarily given this expectation that they can win, and they just shown so good. And then Andre Fleury versus Jonathan Quick, a heck of a first round in my personal opinion. I'm gonna take Vegas actually in 7 games. I'll take Vegas home ice. It goes to show how much I do NHL podcasting, but I do like watching hockey. That you can sleep at night. You're not listening to someone who's a complete novice. I watch enough to know and see, to know what I see and to make predictions off of it. Maybe I'm just trying to prove that to myself at this point, but I digress. I picked the Vegas Golden Knights with home ice advantage in Game 7. That place is going to be rocking in Vegas. So they're going to be a tough out, and have the home ice advantage all the way to the conference finals is huge. If they can possibly draw the Avalanche or the Wild, it could be even bigger. They can possibly ride a home ice advantage all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. Real quick about the Ducks and the Sharks. They've kind of been similar all season. The Ducks just got past the Sharks after the longest time. The Sharks were in second place, and now they cede a home ice advantage to the Anaheim Ducks after losing their final matchup of the season to the Minnesota Wild. I look at the Anaheim Ducks as a team that they have a lot of good players. I mean, Rickard Rakell really coming into his own, but they still have guys like Ryan Getzlaff, who's a savvy veteran, as well as Ryan Kessler. They're guys that can really get the job done. And the Sharks are kind of a similar way. I know Joe Thornton's probably not going to get back in time for the playoffs, and if he is, how effective can he be? But they're similar. They have a lot of good veterans. Joe Pavelski, Logan Couture. I mentioned Thornton, but he's probably not going to play. So for the Ducks, how good can John Gibson be? That is the question for me. I think he can be good as a netminder for the team, but I do favor Martin Jones in this matchup. Why I'm going Sharks in 6 games. I think that they'll be able to steal one in Anaheim and then win most of their steal at least one in Anaheim and probably win most of their home games. The Sharks will at the Shark Tank. But I think the difference for the Sharks is what they got in the trades at the deadline. I really it doesn't always just come down to one player. But I really like what they got in Evander Kane to get that second and third lines even better when you move down certain players, even like Tomas Hertl and whatnot. So I think when you look at guys like Brent Burns on the defense and Mark-Edward Vlasic, they're good enough defensively. They continue to have Paul Martin there as well. They're good enough defensively, I think, with the best penalty kill in all of the NHL to get the job done and still have good enough offensively with guys like Pavelski. Well, I guess they're second best in penalty kill. They're first best in penalty kill up until that last game. But I really like what they got with Evander Kane if he can remain healthy going into the playoffs. And, they have I think a far-reaching offense enough to where they don't have to rely on one guy. But Brent Burns, Logan Couture, and Joe Pavelski, they're going to have good playoffs in order for my prediction to reign true. So I think they'll play Vegas in the next round. And I will take San Jose in 7 games against. I know you're probably saying here, Sharks fan, 100%. It's probably giving me a little bit of a factor leaning one way. I just think this is a team that, don't forget, they made the Stanley Cup 2 years ago. I mean, I'm not sure you have forgotten, but they did make the Stanley Cup 2 years ago. And then even last year against the Edmonton Oilers in the playoffs, they should have won a game here and a game there. And I think they were still kind of reeling of not having Logan Couture. They had Patrick Marleau back then. Right now, he's in Toronto having his own playoff matchup. But they didn't have Couture or Thornton in that playoff series, and that really hurt them. They're going to have Couture, and they had more time to prepare without Thornton now. But they did have Thornton. I'll take that back. I mean, they had Thornton, and he was playing through a torn ACL and MCL or whatnot. So now they know they're not going to have Thornton, and they're not going to be able to have to rely on a guy playing on one leg basically. And then now they have a fully healthy, face smash Logan Couture, and I think this is a team that will step up in the playoffs, similar to how we've seen teams who have been here before do it, and that's why the Kings were such a threat in my personal opinion, and they'll get the job done. And I say it's in 7. It's all gonna come down to whether they can win in Vegas. And I think they're gonna get it done and get to the conference finals. So the other side here, the Nashville Predators and the Colorado Avalanche. I'm just going to say a couple nice things about the Avalanche. We've seen a really good season and a real great step forward from a guy like Nathan MacKinnon for the Colorado Avalanche. He's 97 points, so he had a really good season. Led the team in both goals, 39, and assists, 58. And not to mention, the fact of the matter is they had another great guy in Mikko Rantanen, who also had a really good season. So I don't know if I can really trust them with Semyon Varlamov as their goalie. He's been okay. Jonathan Bernier, I'm not sure which one they're going to give to. I believe it's going to be Varlamov, but I don't necessarily trust them enough, especially against the best team in the NHL, which is the Nashville Predators, coming off their great postseason run. All I'll say is that Pekka Rinne is really good. The Nashville Predators are still really good. They brought back Mike Fisher, so they get maybe a more healthy guy than he would have if he played the entire season. They still have guys like Philip Forsberg, Vidar Arvidsson, PK Subban, Ryan Johansson, Roman Josi. So they're so good at the top there in Nashville that I really think that they're going to have easy pickings of the Colorado Avalanche, a young team in the playoffs. I'll pick the Predators to win that series in 5 games. And then you have the Winnipeg Jets, another team that hasn't been in the playoffs in a while, against the Minnesota Wild. Now look at the Minnesota Wild first. They are the 3 seed to the Jets 2 seed, but they still rely heavily when it comes to their team on guys like Eric Stahl, Michael Grunland, Jason Zucker, and Ryan Suter's injury is really, really going to loom large, I think, for this team. And so when you put it down to, can I really trust Devan Dubnyk, who has had really good seasons in the past, but kind of came down to earth this season? I'm not sure I can trust Devan Dubnyk, but they're really good. Are they good enough to get it done? I think 100% Minnesota is good enough to get it done. I've just been very impressed about what Winnipeg has brought to the table with Blake Wheeler. Patrick Laine is a really good young player, right wing out there. And so with a good defense similar to Brent Burns with the Sharks and Dustin Byfuglien, I really think that this team is going to get the job done offensively. And who would I rather have, Connor Hellebuyck or Devan Dubnyk? If you asked me before this season, I probably would have said Dubnyk, but give me Connor Hellebuyck in this series. So they're going to have a tough time, Winnipeg. They're going to win in 6 games, but they're going to have a tough time against Nashville. And I think they could possibly lose in short order to the Preds there. So give me Nashville in 6 games against the Winnipeg Jets there as well. But I do think that out of all the top seeds in each one, the Preds are most likely to get through to the conference finals. Well, they'll match up with the San Jose Sharks, and I have Nashville beating the Sharks in 7 games. They played each other in the playoffs 2 seasons ago, back before the Preds had the amazing runs, obviously before last year. They didn't have PK Subban there. They had Shea Weber instead, and they gave the Sharks a run for their money. They lost in 6 games, I believe. But now I think it's just so different. Nashville's so good. They're so determined to get back and win the Stanley Cup that it's just kind of that redemption story. And then they're the best team in the NHL on top of it. I have to put them in the finals, especially because I don't think the Sharks are really good enough in a 7-game series at this point in the playoffs. You know, this is a team that they got to the Stanley Cup 2 years ago. Before that, there's a team that always kind of crapped out before the Stanley Cup, and at some point they weren't going to get the job done. And obviously they didn't get far last year. They didn't get past the first round. But in this scenario, I have them getting a hard-fought win series over 2 really good teams in the Ducks and the Knights, Golden Knights. And I'm not sure they're going to have enough stamina to get through another tough opponent in Nashville, who might make short order of 2 teams in the Avalanche and the Jets, and could be the Wild as well. Instead of the Jets. But that's my team in the West, the Nashville Predators. Going into the Eastern Conference, and like I said before, I think the East is probably the more compelling of the 2 conferences. I think you're getting one of the best matchups, like I said, in Vegas and LA, but I think the East as a whole kind of has more compelling storylines and compelling teams. And the Tampa Bay Lightning at the top over there, get it over the Boston Bruins. What a comeback season for Steven Stamkos, right? I mean, this is a team that was supposed to continue their dominant run, and then last year just kind of fell off the face of the earth, right? And now you have Nikita Kucherov, who has another heck of a year for Kucherov. Stamkos comes back and puts up 86 points this year. Victor Hedman, Andres Palat, Tyler Johnson, they're all great. Alex Killorn. And then you have that great offense, but you don't have a good goalie. A great goalie. I'll say you have a good goalie, but not a great goalie. And I think when you're relying on Andrei Vasilevsky, he's not Ben Bishop from a few years ago when they made the playoffs. And they're really going to rely heavily on their offense, which is really good offense. But I think when they see who they got in the New Jersey Devils in the playoffs, that's the last team they probably wanted to face, just based on their track record against New Jersey this year. In the regular season, they lost all 3 meetings with the Devils this season, and they're led by Taylor Hall, who had a heck of a year for the Devils in their first time in the playoffs, and quite a bit here. 93 points, 39 goals, 54 assists. He's been a heck of a player, but it's almost been like they don't necessarily want him to just take over some games. They tend to go to different lines, but it's going to be all up to Hall. I think that this series will probably rely mostly on how Hall plays, and then the rookie Nico, excuse me, will have to be, I think, more of a savvy vet in this series than the young kid that he might still be. But getting able to have a guy like Michael Grabner from the Rangers to help out the team, and then have a goalie like Keith Kincaid who's playing the way he's playing right now, they're going to give the Tampa Bay Lightning a run for their money. But I ultimately think that Tampa Bay is too good offensively to not get this done. I think they're too experienced on the Devils side, and there's just too much weapons for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I'm going to give the Devils 2 wins, but Tampa Bay will win in 6 games. Bruins in the Toronto. Did I say Tampa Bay earlier too with because I just talked about Tampa Bay. Patrick Marleau's not in Tampa Bay. He's in Toronto. I might have said Tampa Bay earlier in the podcast, but Patrick Marleau on the Toronto Maple Leafs, first time playing in Canada, and he's done a decent job there. But the Toronto Maple Leafs, to me, they continue to be all about the American Austin Matthews. That's just my personal opinion. So, obviously, they have other good players in Mitch Marner. James Van Riemsdyk has led the team in goals, but Austin Matthews, 34 goals, 29 assists. I think he's a star in the league. So that's why I like the Toronto Maple Leafs a lot. Because of him, William Nylander, Nazem Kadri, they're really good in terms of being able to play defense and score when they need to. That's how I've seen them this year. They've been able to be good enough defensively ahead of Frederik Andersen, but he still let up a decent amount of goals. And offensively, they're not a powerhouse like Tampa Bay, but they can get the job done when they need to. But that's what it comes down to is, are the Boston Bruins just a better team offensively than Toronto? And I think that's where that's where I'm going to have to say, you know what? Tuukka Rask is Tuukka Rask. He's probably going to outplay Frederik Andersen. And then offensively, Brad Marchand, David Pastrnak, Patrice Bergeron, with good defensemen, and Torrey Krug. You know what? I think those guys are too good for Toronto. And listen, I think Toronto could have really put together a good series. They have a rallying point, and at the same time, they've been very, very good. But Boston's just, I think, that much better in both aspects. Tuukka Rask is better than Andersen, and offensively, I think that they can put up more goals for sure in short order. And almost, because this is a team that doesn't quit. Even going back to their Stanley Cup appearances and Stanley Cup championships in the last 10 years, they're just so resilient, and they'll never back down. And I think that's why, even if they're down against Toronto, I'm not sure Toronto can really hold them off in certain circumstances, but they've shown that they can and get the W that way. But I think the Bruins are going to be too good. Give me the Bruins in 6 there as well. Moving to the bottom half, I'll start with Washington Capitals. I don't trust Washington. And listen, they came in first place in the Metropolitan Division with 105 points. Really good season. But why do I still not trust the Washington Capitals? We already know their playoff struggles, right? But why can't I trust this team? A lot of it has to do with the fact that now I'm kind of more relying on Philip Grubauer than Braden Holtby. And if they decide to go with Holtby in the playoffs, still, I don't trust Holtby. And then if they go with Grubauer, he's had a better year than Holtby, but I don't know if I trust Grubauer as my main guy. But I could be wrong. We've seen backup goalies go on really good runs. You saw Cam Ward, an amazing run back, in 2006 it was it? So, they're goalies that can just really put teams on their back and not even be the best goalies. We can see that from Keith Kincaid in New Jersey. But we know what they have, right? They're Ovechkin, Backstrom, Oshie. They're a really good team in here in Washington. But I can't, in good conscience say to myself, you know what? They're going to be good enough to make it to the Stanley Cup final. Does that make them good enough to beat the Capitals? Does that make the Capitals good enough to beat the Columbus Blue Jackets? This Blue Jackets team, I don't think, is the same as they were last year. But they still have good enough options at the top of their team with Artemi Panarin and Cam Atkinson, Zach Werenski. But the problem is, I don't know if this team is really good enough. They were able to get Thomas Vanek at the deadline, and I just don't know if I could really see this team being good enough to get the job done offensively. But the one saving grace, if you're a Blue Jackets fan, is obviously Sergei Bobrovsky. Defense as a goalie, this guy's just been really good. And I think that with the playoffs, I touched on it so many times in this podcast, and we all know it. The goaltenders can really make or break a series, and if he keeps the Blue Jackets into this game, into this series, they can pull out the upset. But that being said, I do think the Capitals will win in 6 games and make it to the next round. Ultimately, they will face Pittsburgh or Philly. We've seen the run the Philly teams have been on, but Pittsburgh is the defending national champions, defending Stanley Cup champions. Once again, we're talking about the defending, right? They've won the last two, and I don't think they're going to go out against a Philadelphia Flyers team who, you know what, have they been okay? Yes, but they really haven't been that dominant. Only a +8 differential in terms of goal differential, and they still have Claude Giroux and Sean Courtier, but man, I just don't know if I can really trust this team enough at the top there. Goalie-wise, Brian Elliott, is that who I'm relying on? Or Peter Mrazek? I guess we're going with Mrazek, but I just don't know if I could really trust the Philadelphia Flyers in this situation. And at the top there, we've seen them kind of struggle in the past. Shane Gostisbehere and Radko Gudas on defense, they've been very good. And then obviously the top, you're talking about Giroux, Courtier, and now Jacob Voracek. But I'm not going to put any eggs in their basket. Still give me the Pittsburgh Penguins. I know there's some concern with Matt Murray in goal, with the fact of the matter being that he might not be healthy enough when push comes to shove. But he's healthy right now, as far as I can tell, and I think he's good enough, and he's shown with the experience that he can really put a team on his back, even if he isn't didn't have the greatest regular season, which really wasn't good at all. 2.92 goals against average. So really struggled, but I still trust him in the playoffs, especially with the team that has Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby at the top. I think that Pittsburgh will go on to they'll win this series in 6. I think they'll beat the Capitals in 5 games. Like I said, I don't really trust anyone in goal there for the Capitals, and offensively, I think that this team is just too good, offensively and defensively. So there's that. Chris Letang. They actually have Chris Letang this year. So we know what this team can do, and I think they're going to continue to do it on a really high level, and they'll play in the conference finals. Who's it going to be? They will play I'm going to go with the Tampa Bay Lightning in the conference finals. I think that'll be a good one. I think Tampa Bay will beat Boston. I don't know about easily. I think I'll say it's going to be a 7-game series, just because I haven't said many are going to be 7-game series, but they lead the league in goals per game. I really think that they're really successful when it comes to power play. So that's going to be very important. And in terms of power play kill, Boston's very good at it, but I just think Tampa Bay is just too good at the top there. If they let up too many of their own power plays, Boston could really take advantage of it. But I think in the end, it's really going to come down to Tampa Bay is going to be able to put points up against Tuukka Rask at that point, I think. And give me the Tampa Bay Lightning against the Pittsburgh Penguins. And do I dare go back to the well of a Pittsburgh Penguins Nashville Predators Stanley Cup? I will. I think Pittsburgh is going to get there again. And I will pick the Predators to take it home. They're just so good, guys, and the redemption story is what it comes down to. We've seen teams in the past get back to the Stanley Cup and not necessarily win, but I think that getting back is so hard that if they do it, they will get the job done, and they will win against Pittsburgh Penguins, who, I'm not going to say their luck's going to run out. I'm not even luck, but I think it's just the fact of the matter. They've done this for so long. Someone has to beat them. And if they win a third in a row, this will be one of the best teams, I think, of all. We really look to go down in one of the best teams in history, and Sidney Crosby will really cement himself in as one of the best players in the history of the game if he hasn't already. But that's my predictions. I know that they're not necessarily hard-hitting analysis, but I just wanted to throw them out there to you. Predators over the Pittsburgh Penguins. If you want to let me know your predictions of the Stanley Cup playoffs, you can tweet at me at EricH1045. So that will do it for the Sittin Sportside podcast. I would love to talk to you guys about a bunch of other things if you would like to, if you need to listen. So keep your eyes peeled to 1045theteam.com and the podcast page. Click on the Sittin Sportside podcast or youtube.com/team1045. Go to playlist and click on the Sittin Sportside podcast. I'll be talking a lot of MLB this year, and NFL offseason, NBA playoffs are starting soon. I might have a podcast about the NBA playoffs. I might preview it, and if I don't preview it, I'll definitely have something during the playoffs to talk about. So, once again, I'm Eric Himmon. Thank you for listening to the Sittin Sportside podcast right here on 104.5theteam.com.